Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is S, and today I would be doing was suggested to me by someone on the internet, a rundown of all the parts. And keeping with the theme of tutorials, yeah, this is not exactly for you veterans out there, but if you have any confusion over any parts that you don't know what they do in the game, just go ahead and watch this video. Start with the command module area. This is the Mark 1. It can carry one Kerbal, and it doesn't have any front section. This is for the very front of the space plane. You can use it for rockets, I guess, but I don't see why you would. This is the Mark II cockpit. It does have an area for stuff to put on the front. It carries one person, and as of 0.17 update, it does not have an interior cockpit, or at least one you can see out of, or any instruments or anything like that. And this is the Mark III cockpit. Holds, I believe, who is it? How many is it? 3 people? Yeah, 3 Kerbals. Has an area for the front, and it also does not have an internal view. The only cockpit for space planes that has an internal view right now is the Mark 1, and it does look very nice. And then, as I went over before, size 2 command pod holds 3 people and fits size 2 parts. Size 1 command pod, Mark 1, 1 person, size 1 parts. Alright, and I'm just going to pick the small one for the part rundown. I plan not to put many parts on. We'll start off in the propulsion section. First, we have this basic fuel tank, size 1. Then we have the half-size fuel tank. It's basically the same as this, except it's half the size, carries half as much fuel, all that stuff. This size 2 double fuel tank. Size 1 double fuel tank. This right here is a jet engine. It is an air-breathing engine and only works in the atmosphere, preferably closer to the ground, because the air is thicker down there. This is a size 1 liftoff engine. It's designed not to go into space. I mean, it can go into space, but if you want to go into space and you're using size 1, this is much better. Yes, it looks smaller, but it burns less fuel, gives a little less thrust, but it also has the ability to vector its thrust. And what that means, it can it assists you in turning, because it is able to change its angle. And it's much better for spaceflight than this large engine right here. And over here we have a general purpose large size 2 engine. There is no for size 2 parts, there is no version that is space worthy and one that is liftoff worthy. It's just this, and this does have vectoring, so you don't have to worry about that. This is a size 2. You can use it as a landing engine or as a pod engine for you know, orbital spaceflight, that kind of stuff. Obviously smaller, burns less fuel. It's good because it's smaller and it makes a good landing engine. This is basically the same thing except it's size 1. Good for landing engines again. And then over here we start into the spaceplane parts. This is the Mark 1 fuselage. It is the size of the Mark 1 cockpit. It holds some fuel. This looks exactly the same, except it doesn't hold any fuel. It's just for structure. There are many reasons why you would use structural over fuel. Maybe you don't actually want the part to have fuel. You just want to give more structure to your space plane. And it also increases weight if you have fuel in there. This is the Mark II fuselage. It is the size of the Mark II cockpit, obviously. And you use this, which is the adapter. I can't fit it on there because it's not attached to a rocket. I'll just put it right there. And it goes from the Mark I size, increases, now it's Mark II size. Alright, that's that. This is the Mark III fuselage. Obviously, it fits the Mark III cockpit. And it can be transferred to by the Mark II to Mark III adapter. There's no Mark I to Mark III, but it's not really a problem. Mark II to Mark III is just fine. However, when it spawns upside down, so you're probably going to want to put it on the front of your rocket, depending on, or your space plane, depending on what size cockpit you have, and you can rotate it like this using the W, A, S, and D keys, as well as the Q and E keys. Q obviously rotates it. horizontal movement DNS, and W and A, or it's a little messed up in the rocket view, but it works well in the spaceplane hangar. Anyway, we'll get rid of that. So that's the spaceplane parts. And right here is one of my favorite engines. It is the NERVA, or nuclear-powered rocket motor. It does burn fuel, and it is not good for in-atmosphere flight, but where it excels, it is wonderful when it comes to space flight because it burns fuel very slowly due to its nuclear design, and it's basically just a great rocket for getting, or a great engine for getting in between planets. It's basically just a planetary transfer engine, and it burns a lot more fuel in the atmosphere than it does in space, so you don't want to use these in the atmosphere. Also, they don't give much thrust, and which is okay once you're in space because you're not really in a hurry when you're in space. Anyway, then we have these radial engines. These are for size 2 parts, but you can fit them on size 1. Everything actually fits together. It just might look a little awkward. These, can be put on the sides. I can't really demonstrate it very well on just the pod, but put on the sides and stop flashing. Put on the sides, and they make good landing engines as well. Or just, there's no part in this game that you're really told has to work this way. It's all up to what you want to do. Page 2 of Propulsion is thankfully smaller. This is the size 1 RCS fuel tank, and I covered RCS in my moon landing video, but in case you didn't watch that or are just starting in, RCS is tiny rocket thrusters that can help you maneuver your craft. They can either turn it or they can translate it. What translate means is basically just move it forward, move it backwards, move it to the sides, up, down, instead of just rotating it. That's the size 1 fuel tank, and the fuel tank does not have to be connected to the RCS thrusters in any way. It can be anywhere on the rocket, and the thrusters can be anywhere else on the rocket. This is the RCS fuel tank size 2. This is for, obviously, the size 2 parts. Holds more fuel, heavier, to be expected. This is the Sepratron. It's very small, but it's pretty interesting in its use. What you can do is you can put it on parts that you want to separate away from the rocket. It's basically a retro rocket, and it starts its default pointing down, but you can just press D or A 2 times to turn it upside down, and when you stage it, it will activate it and push the part away as long as the part has been separated. If it hasn't been separated, it tends to overheat things and explode them. So you want to make sure that the part is off of your rocket as you activate them. It just gets stuff away from the next stage, so you don't have to worry about it colliding. Getting to the end of Propulsion here, this is the solid fuel booster size 1. This is an engine that cannot be controlled by the throttle. It burns at a steady rate, and once it's exhausted, it's exhausted. You cannot, these are basically good for just getting into space or getting off the launch pad if you've been having trouble. This here is the size 2 solid fuel booster. Same story, just larger. Finally, we have 2 jet engines. This is the Aerospike rocket. It is actually a rocket. It does not burn air, and it has pretty decent thrust. I haven't experimented too much with it, but people on the internet tend to like it. But just keep in mind that it does burn fuel out of spaceplanes pretty quickly, so you mostly just want to use it if you intend to get a spaceplane into orbit or land on a body or anything like that. And this is the turbojet engine. This works best in high altitude due to the it has a different air consumption rate, and it works well in high altitude, not so well lower altitude. This is for high altitude spaceplanes. Okay, we're finally done with propulsion. We can move on to the next tabs. This is command and control. Luckily, there are fewer things in here. Command and control, you have the advanced canard, good for spaceplanes, provides lift and a greater deal of control over your ship. This is the advanced SAS module for size 1 parts. The advanced SAS module is actually interesting. It doesn't have a whole lot of influence on your rocket unless you have other RCS modules. I mean, you can just fit it with an advanced SAS module and it will work just fine, but it really compounds the effect with more SAS modules, because this is basically like the command SAS module. It helps coordinate everything else. This is the control surface for space planes. It's basically, you know, if you're familiar with anything about aircraft, it's ailerons, anything like that. It basically just vectors the air in different directions and helps you turn, helps you gain altitude, that kind of stuff. This is the advanced SAS module for large ships, as in size 2. There is no non-advanced SAS module for size 2, but that doesn't matter because this thing works like a charm. This is the avionics package. It's great for space planes because I'm pretty sure, I don't think any other SAS part can do this, but with this equipped, you can actually slowly change your intended heading while this is activated, and it won't throw a fit about it. It won't try to correct your craft back to its original heading. It will accept the new heading, but it's very slow, so it's really good for space planes if you don't want them to flip out and flip over and crash on the ground. Standard canard, basically just another control surface for space planes, adds lift, adds control, that kind of stuff. This is the linear RCS port. It fires RCS fuel in one direction only. I'm not sure of the benefits to this over the other RCS block, but it can be useful on space planes if you don't want them to look hideously or have RCS fuel flying out in all directions. This is the other RCS block. It has thrusters in 4 directions. These are great for rockets, command pods, that sort of thing. Moon landers are really well equipped with these. They, like I said, they do things like translate the rocket up, down, sideways, and they rotate the rocket, but only when you turn RCS on. Then they slowly consume fuel from whatever tanks you have equipped. Like I said, this is the SAS module. The smaller version is not the advanced. This is a smaller version of the standard control surface, and I'm getting a tiny bit of lag. This is a smaller version of the standard control surface, obviously for just smaller areas, perhaps tail fins, that kind of stuff. And finally, this is a winglet, and it is... God, stop lagging. It provides control to your rocket. These are generally used on rockets. You can, and for a while, they were used as makeshift landing legs before landing legs were introduced. Now we're going to go into the structural and aerodynamic tab, and I'm getting a little bit of lag, and I don't like it. Okay, we'll continue on. Tail connector. Most everything in structural and aerodynamic is, a lot of it's cosmetic, and obviously structural, as the name would imply. Tail connector, good for space planes, looks cool. Circular intake. In theory, these would help air-breathing engines work a little better, but they don't. They don't provide any increase in power whatsoever. They're just for cosmetics. This is the size 2 decoupler, and if you haven't seen any KSP videos at all, then you won't know this, but they're used for disconnecting parts from another in a vertical fashion. No, these are for size 2 parts. This right here is the delta wing. This is the standard wing that you're probably going to use on most of your space planes. Come on. Ugh, this lag is annoying me. I think it's because I'm running fraps. Okay. Yeah, it's fairly large. It's good for space planes because they basically just, you know, act as wings. This is the fuel duct, fuel line, if people call them, and they take, or when you connect them to fuel tanks, they take fuel from the thing you put it on to the second thing that you clicked. Let me do a just quick example. For instance, if you had this tank here, and this engine here, and then you had tanks on the outsides. If I can get, yeah. Okay. You take the fuel line, and you take it from these tanks to the middle tanks, and the way they work is they actually use the fuel in the tanks that you are you plan to get rid of first, and then it goes to the final tanks. So they're really good for adding just extra fuel tanks on things that need just a little more fuel to work. But keep in mind, they do not go both ways. You have to, fuel goes from whatever you clicked on to whatever you clicked on second. This is the Rockomax brand adapter. It is adapter from size 1 to size 2. And it looks almost exactly like the size 2 pod. It increases aesthetics in the rocket. This right here is a little interesting thing. The launch stability enhancer. You can place it on whatever part you want, and when you get on the launch pad, your rocket will be held up by this. So for any of you having any problems with maybe large rockets that keep collapsing under their own weight, or perhaps destroying parts on the bottom because of their own weight, this is the part for you. You just attach it to whatever you want to stay, and then you put it in the staging list to make sure that it fires when the first rockets fire. Because otherwise you can have some nasty problems, because they tend to stage themselves in whatever stage the part that they were attached to was in. So you got to be careful with those. Engine nacelle, again, just it's aesthetic. It's for spaceplane use mostly. They do not carry any fuel. They're basically just places to put your engines. Aerodynamic nose cone for size 2 parts. You can put it right there and it will close off the end. It generally just looks nicer. This is the NCS adapter for a lot of... You use them on spaceplanes a lot. They're good for adapting the Mark II cockpit to a nose, or to make a nose. I typically make a Mark II cockpit, then put one of these, and then put the avionics package on front. I like the way it looks. These are radial decouplers. You can put them on the sides of things, and they will hold up, for instance, things like engines or boosters. And these ones are for the size 1 parts, but when you activate them in the staging, they will activate explosive bolts and blow off whatever is attached to it. They're really good for separating, say, boosters or extra fuel tanks, things like that. And right next to it is the size 2 decoupler, radial decoupler part. It has more strength, won't break as easily, holds larger parts, but it is obviously bigger. Also has a greater ejection force. As you can see, the ejection force is 180 here and 120 over here. Engine body, same as the engine nacelle. It's aesthetic, doesn't hold any fuel. This is the RAM air intake, which, as the same thing as this air intake up here, it would in theory make the high altitude engines for spaceplanes work better, but it doesn't. It's also just for aesthetics. But they do look sweet on rockets, on spaceplanes. These are the small hard points. These do not separate, but they are nice for putting things on them that need a place to be put that won't come off. They're good for, say, radial engines on a spaceplane. This is the size 1 vertical decoupler. It does the same thing as up here. It's just for size 1 parts. This is the stack tricoupler. Now keep in mind, this is not a decoupler. If this will not activate and separate the rocket, you need to put another decoupler above it. But what it does is it separates the thing into 3 parts, and you can put three fuel tanks or engines or solid rocket boosters. It doesn't matter. These are good for, but this is only good for small size 1 rockets. There is currently no adapter for size 2 rockets. Standard nose cone. It's a nose cone for size 1 parts. Structural pylon. These are kind of like hard points, except they will come off when you activate them in the staging. They will push whatever they have off, but they're large and they're good for, they were included in the spaceplane update, so they're good for space planes, and I guess you could use them for rockets too. Wings, these are all wings out here. Structural wing, they all pretty much do the same thing, except for this. This is not a wing. This is a strut connector. These are for anchoring parts together, because often you have a lot of problems with wobbling and coming off, things like that. Basically, your large rockets will pretty much just be stacks of fuel tanks just bound together by duct tape and struts. The rest of these are all wings. You can see what they look like here. Tail fin, wing connector for making wings larger, and this is a winglet. usually used for rockets. This does not have any vectoring, so you can't use this to control. It just makes it a little more stable. And finally, onto the last tab that has any significance, utility and scientific. Ladder, put this on anywhere, Kerbals can climb on it. Size 1 landing struts, press G to activate. They will come out and you can use them for landing. Size 2 landing struts, same story. Mark II parachute, it's very large for size 2 parts, such as the size 2 capsule. Same thing, smaller part for size 1 capsules, and obviously when you activate them they come out, but only in the atmosphere. Obviously they're only useful in the atmosphere, that kind of thing. These are gear bays, good for space planes. You can also press G, just like the landing struts up here, to bring them in and out, but these are good for rolling, you know, as you would expect a space plane to do. These, finally, the last 2 parts we have to go over are the extendable ladders. Put this on anywhere, it will start the mission retracted, but when you right-click it, either in the rocket view or if you are on EVA and you are close enough to it, and it has a pretty tolerant radius, as in you can be pretty far away from it and right-click it, it'll come up with a little option saying extend. You press extend, thing comes out. This thing is shorter, and this one is longer. These are the 2 tabs right here, have nothing in them. I don't know what they're for yet. Decals, maybe put stuff on your rocket. Crew, maybe change up the crew of your rocket, but they have not implemented that into the game yet. Alright, that finishes up all the parts. Hope you enjoyed this video, or maybe not enjoyed, it was kind of long, but I hope you found it informative is a better phrase to use, and I think I'm just going to sign off here, so I'll see you guys all later.